Okay, so good evening, or if you're in Australia, good morning. Obviously, the NRL season is now just 2 days away, or a day and a half away if you're in Australia. So it's literally upon us. Obviously, kickoff is on Thursday, the 10th of March. Um, I was going to do a standalone preview video. Last season, I did it for every single club. That was very time consuming, although rewarding, and I just haven't got the time this year to do that. So, what better way to do a preview than to have a live stream preview, and we go through who we think is going to make the finals, who's going to be the wooden spoonists, that kind of thing. Um, Obviously, no major rule changes in the off season. Apart from if you're in the attacking half and you give away a six again, it's automatically a penalty. Apart from that, no crazy rule changes, which is a good thing for the first time in 2 years that they're rolling back on the rule changes. I felt in 2020 it was justified, but 2021 with the foul play crackdown on Magic Round onwards, it went a bit overboard, and there was some fair criticism. While I do think that the quality of play is far better than what it was in 2019, um, I think they need to just be careful with doing the rule changes as frequently. Allow these new rules to bed in, and let's see how this season goes on that front. Obviously, a lot of bad weather on the east coast, especially in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. There's been bad flooding, so there's going to be weather-affected games. Obviously, the Warriors had their second trial match cancelled, so I think the Warriors could be the most undercooked side going into this season. With a lot of new signings, a lot of new faces, a lot of player turnover, I think the Warriors could be a little bit underprepared for this season. Liverpool into this is a rugby league specialist rugby league live stream this evening. On a normal live stream, of course, I would happily discuss Liverpool and Inter Milan and who's better, but I'm focusing on the NRL because the season is literally a day and a half away from kickoff, um, and I haven't done a preview video yet. So while I'm happy tomorrow, for example, to do a normal or this weekend, for example, do a normal live stream, normal question and answer session, because the NRL season is about to kick off. I have been promising a preview. So here we go. Obviously, some of the teams that missed out on finals football last year, like Brisbane, Canberra, um, West Tigers, just getting worse season upon season. A lot of issues there. They could get the wooden spoon this year. Um, there were some teams that missed out. The St George Illawarra Dragons were doing really well, were comfortably inside the top eight, and then suddenly Barbecue Gate happened, and they didn't win. I think they won one more game after that. Their form went off a cliff. Look for them to have a bounce back season. Canberra, I mean Brisbane, improvement. Two of the teams that I'm very, very concerned about, a lot of the experts are concerned about as well, are the Canterbury Bulldogs with Trent Barrett and the North Queensland Cowboys. That Tamalolo contract's looking a bit bad, and Valentine Holmes signed as a fullback now playing in the centres. My thoughts on Shane Warne's death are we have covered this on other live streams again. This is we're aiming for this to be an NRL based live stream this evening because the NRL season is literally um, under 2 days away now. It's a day and a half till the NRL season kicks off. However, Shane Warne transcends, I think, sport in a sense. You could put, he was almost an AFL player. Just imagine if he become a cross code player and end up in the NRL. It is plausible that could have happened, and he didn't quite make the grade in the VFL at the time. But I've covered Shane Warne's death. I am going to do a video on Shane Warne's career and his post-playing career at some point, but we're focusing solely on the NRL 2022 season and other related questions. However, he was a big sports fan other than cricket. And a very popular individual because he was seen as the average bloke in the street if he wasn't a cricket player. There you go. How do I see the Redcliffe Dolphins doing in 2023? There's a lot of players off contract at the end of this season, and they have signed some talent, and they're trying to get hold of I think they're going to have. Look, they've got Wayne Bennett as coach, so any team with Wayne Bennett as coach is already a contender, in my opinion. How will they do? Well, the NRL hasn't tried expansion since the Titans joined, and it's been a mixed bag with the Gold Coast Titans. They've only made the finals, I think, 4 or 5 times. How do I see them doing? We've got to see what roster they put on the field, and obviously they've got to make there's a league minimum, there's a salary cap floor they've got to reach. The salary cap is going up next season slightly because of the expansion fees and what Redcliffe bring to the table money wise. So the salary cap is going up. There's more revenue sharing because they have 17 clubs. At the moment, until they've got their full roster assembled, which they don't at this time, it's very hard to predict how they're going to do next season. Very, very hard. I think we have to wait until they've got every player signed that they're going to put on the field. Obviously, they've got a catchment area when it comes to their junior program. So there's going to be some Queensland Cup players who would have been Gold Coast or Brisbane players in their systems that are going to be floating around that are going to want game time. Obviously, when the trials happen this time next year, we'll get an idea of their squad depth. There's probably going to be some Super League players as well who come over to the NRL, and there'll probably be a couple of overseas non-Polynesian and non-Australasian players in their squad. I wouldn't bet against that. Anything can happen between now and this time next year. There's obviously a World Cup. Players could retire in this time, so they've got their targets set on a few players. They've been heavily linked with Cameron Munster. They've been linked with some other high-profile players. There are players coming off contract, as I say, at the end of the season, where there'll be contract negotiations throughout the season with some of these players coming off contract. But until their squad is fully signed up, announced, we know what their squad depth and their talent charts are going to be like. It's too early to say how they're going to do next year. I would expect them to be very competitive with the amount of money they have behind them and the sponsorship they're bringing in and the amount of money that the club commands in value. They are the wealthiest rugby league club in the world, and they haven't played an NRL game yet. So they've got a lot of finance behind them, a lot of revenue streams through the club structure from the existing Redcliffe Dolphins club anyway. So they're not building a club from scratch. They've been playing in the Queensland Cup, grades for some time. They've got an established community around them. They're announcing their first ever first grade side since the Brisbane competition in the 80s. So they're an established club, historic club. They've just never played at NRL level, basically. But they've got a lot of finance behind them. I would expect them to put a competitive side on the field, and any potential 18th club expansion. I think the NRL will be looking to see how Redcliffe do in their first season, possibly 2 seasons, before they consider adding an 18th team. Much like the NHL with the Vegas Golden Knights before Seattle came in, there was a fair gap of about 4 or 5 years before they went to 32 teams from 31. The concern is diluting the talent pool. In the short term, yes, the top end talent will be spread more thinly around the league, but in the long term, it will reap benefits of the league going up to 17 and then ultimately 18 teams. I would say if the Dolphins are to be a competitive side next year, a lot will have to do with their forward pack and their halves combination. If they can get a solid forward pack that gives them front football and a half decent halves combination for your starting half-back partnership, they'll be a decent mid-table team at worst. But again, it all depends on who they sign in their spine and in their forward pack, and then the outside backs sort themselves out. Given the right possession, right territory, and right space created by the more creative players, tries should come. An average winger can still score 15 tries a season. It's all about how you build that spine, the creative spine, the leadership spine. But it's too early to tell how they'll do. I think they'll be an average mid-table team next year. I don't think they're going to win the comp in their first season. I don't think the NRL was going to expect that. But as I say, we'll have to see what transpires, what players they sign, what squad depth they end up adding. And also, they've got to be cap compliant as well. So they can't just sign loads of superstars and hope that's going to work. There's got to be, they've either got to meet the salary cap floor or be within 10% of the salary cap itself. I would reckon they would leave themselves a bit of cap room should there be an injury or, you know, a big name player comes off contract to maybe a Queenslander wants to go play in Queensland again. But yeah, that's a watch this space, wait and kind of see mentality. But yeah, let's do 2022 season preview. So what I'm going to do is actually use my notes from last year because I've got the teams in alphabetical order, which is really handy. So obviously Brisbane 2 years ago they were wooden spoonists. They obviously improved last year. So I would assume Brisbane's goal is to be in the top 8 or just below, but to win more games and show signs of improvement. A lot depends on Adam Reynolds and how he gels with his teammates. Obviously, he hasn't played in the trials matches, and of course, he's caught COVID. So, keeping Adam Reynolds fit and firing is going to be important for Brisbane this season. But they've got some good young players. They've got some players coming back off injury. They've got to take steps forward. Canberra, I think they want to bounce back into the 8. Injuries and the George Williams situation and the aftermath of Bateman's leaving as well disrupted the team. And then injuries kicked in. And unlike in 2020, 2021, it caught up with them somewhat. It doesn't mean they're a bad side. A couple of years off a grand final appearance, they're not a bad side overnight. They came within a few points of beating the Roosters back in 2019. You don't suddenly become a bad team overnight. There are some issues there. Fogarty being out injured for most of the season. It's all they can. It all depends who they partner with Jack White in the halves, because you want Jack White to run the ball a lot and be off the cuff, but you need a structured halfback who's willing to just put the kicks in, put the passes in, and move the team around and direct the forward pack. I would expect the Raiders to be back in the top 8. The lower end of the top 8, though, I think they are 1 or 2 players short of being a top 4 side. The Bulldogs, I think they're going to be still scrapping around the bottom. I can't see enough in their trials matches. They were shocking in their second trials match, absolutely shocking, and I can't see enough improvement. I think Flanagan not being used at all and partnered with Burton is. I agree with this. Why sign him if you're not going to play him and give him confidence? He was really good at the Roosters, and I felt he was unfairly treated after the Roosters crashed out when they did. But injuries were taking their toll, and doing back to back, trying to do a 3 in a row was too much for him. He was a young player, and he was sort of thrown under the bus there. So his confidence has been knocked. He's been knocked further after last season. And he's a metronomical goal kicker. He's a very calm presence. He's a very structured halfback. And with Burton doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the 6 jersey, I think the Bulldogs have problems because their only out and out 7 who's had a decent run in the NRL is not getting picked. And I'm not sold on the coach either, on Trent Barrett as a head coach at this level. He's just not good enough. Cronulla, they're going to be in the 8. I can see them doing big things. I think they're going to be a dark horse to make a grand final or the top 4. And they've got a new coach in there. They've got Fitzgibbon, new coach, wants to prove himself. Really good signings. Finucane is an underrated signing for them for that forward pack, and they've got a very exciting back line. And Nico Hyde is one of my favourite players. He came to the NRL late, but he's an underrated player and fully deserves a shot at a starting halves position. Even though I think he's better as a fullback or a centre, I think he deserves a shot to show what creativity he's got. And he was very, very creative in the second trials match against Canterbury, ironically, and he ran the show. So he's a very, very good player. So far, I can see 2 out of Canberra and Cronulla probably making the 8. Brisbane, I think, just coming up short, but still improvement. Their defence has still got to improve a little bit more, but it is a lot better than what it was. Canterbury, nah, I'm not sold on Canterbury myself. I think they're just they may have made the signings, but I'm not sure it's the right guy coaching them. Gold Coast, I can see them making progress under Justin Holbrook. First 2 seasons with Holbrook have just seen improvement year on year, so I'm expecting continued improvement. Much like my prediction last year, improvement in finals again. It's just about winning, a finals match and then taking that next step. But losing Fogarty is a problem. Losing, Peachy is a problem, I think, for them. However, they've got some great young talent coming through. So replacing some outgoing veterans with some up and coming younger players, I don't think that's a bad thing. And getting David Fafita to reach his potential with a very solid forward pack around him, keeping Fafita also grounded as well. There is no doubt on his dynamic ball running ability, destructive. It's just making him a more rounded player. But I can see them improving, possibly maybe moving a place or two up the ladder. They were a bit inconsistent last season, a bit Jekyll and Hyde, but I can see improvement with them. Manly, they've got to beat one of the top 4 from last season to be contenders. That's where they fell short. And their shocking start to the season last year. To have another season start like that, I can't see them progressing. I can see them holding station, but they've got to beat one of the top 4 sides. Until they can do that, then even if they get on a run in the finals, as proven against in the finals against Souths, it just didn't happen because they couldn't beat a top 4 side in the regular season. But they did bounce back, as I predicted last year. Bounce back and making finals. They were on prediction. Also, keeping Tom Trbojevic fit and healthy for a whole season. He missed a fair chunk of last season, and without him, their record was appalling. He's so key for them, which is worrying that one player has such an impact on a team that without him, they struggle. But I can see them being solid top 6. If they're to make top 4, they've got to beat teams that were in the top 4 last season, and I don't think they're quite there yet. But we'll see. There could be a dark horse. Melbourne Storm, I can see them going backwards slightly. I think we've been saying this now for every year. For it seems like a decade. At some point, they have to run out of steam. Now, Cronk retired. Slater retired. Now Cameron Smith is retired. So, do they finally start slowing down and declining? I think the off-season dramas with Brandon Smith and Cameron Munster, I think have had some impact, if I'm honest. And may have disrupted and unsettled the squad. Losing Nico Hyde and Finucane is, I think, a blow for them. I think they're still a top 4, top 6 side. But again, the record in there, I think the record on opening night is they've not lost a game under Craig Bellamy for 18 years. So they always start the season strong. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens with them, whether they can continue to be as solid as they have been for so long, considering that their leadership core is now complete turnover of leadership core over the last 4 or 5 years, with key players from their spine having retired or moved on and then retired later on. And Cameron Munster keeping his temperament in check, and Brandon Smith as well. I think their off-field dramas would have been a bit unsettling, and of course, as I say, losing a couple of key players who've moved on. And Finucane, I think, was the unheralded leader of that team behind Cameron Smith. I think Finucane was one of the leaders of that team. So losing him from the dressing room is also Cronulla's game, Melbourne's loss. So we shall see how the Storm do. I can still see them being top 6 because it's a Craig Bellamy team and they very rarely do not make the finals. I think the Knights, they could be one of those teams that take a step back. Obviously, they've had some turnover in players and key players. You know, and Caelan Ponga, a lot now rests on his shoulders, and keeping Bradman Best fit for a whole season as well is going to prove crucial. You know, it's a lot of pressure on a very young leadership group. In what I think, and I was correct in their week one finals, and they were out. Can they, push on from just getting to the first week of the finals? They've lost Mitchell Pearce as well. That's experience. So they've got inexperienced halves and inexperienced captain. Key players, key strike players for them are very, very young. And Bradman Best is crucial for their running game in the back line. Ponga as well. They've got to try and keep those guys fit for the whole season, or the majority of the season, and into the Origin period, because I'm not sold on Newcastle's depth. But look, they've gone back-to-back years in the finals, so that's something. It's all about progressing and continuing to improve, because I still think that they're not the finished article, but they could be one of those teams that were in the finals last year that fall out. The Warriors, I see them as like Brisbane on the outside looking in. Obviously, they've not played New Zealand for 2 years. That's had an impact on the team and their performances. The 6 again rule suits them because of the unstructured style of play. But I think an issue they've had is not having that second trials match because of the weather. I think that is going to affect their preparation for the season. So, how prepared or how up to speed and prepared are the players. Having Sean Johnson back, he's not the player he was, but he still creates something out of nothing. And they Harris DeVita in there, back from injury. Their key creative players have had a lot of injuries, but Sean Johnson and Harris DeVita have had a lot of injuries. Nico Hyde injuries. So while they're very skilled and very creative, and Harris DeVita will tackle all day long, he's a very physical halfback, can also play fullback, also play hooker, very versatile player. Nico Hyde, Harris DeVita, and Sean Johnson have all had injuries the last couple of years, some of them quite serious. So I can see them just being on the edge of the 8, but not making the finals again. I can see them being competitive, but there were some results last season for the Warriors that they were absolutely shocking. They got blown out, and they weren't good enough. The Cowboys, I can't see the Cowboys making the finals. Much like Brisbane, I expect them to be competitive, but that losing run last season was just really shocking. And when you've got players like Valentine Holmes and Tamalolo, who are Origin players, these are international players, just not. Something isn't quite right there. I don't think they ever fully replaced Jonathan Thurston. To be brutally honest, they've lost that leadership from Thurston, a commanding presence on the field. I'm not sold on their squad depth. I'm not sold on their halves. Valentine Holmes, he's signed as a fullback, better as a winger, being played in the centres. I'm not sure what they're trying to achieve there, because they've got the hammer in, Hammer Fidel. So Valentine Holmes, how much longer is he a Cowboy? Will he end up moving on? He's had injury concerns as well. Stint in the NFL, how much has that impacted on him? But I can't see the Cowboys, North Queensland, making the finals. I just can't. And that is taken into consideration that they had a very dominant trials win over Brisbane. Very dominant, but that's a trials match. It's not a match in Falanga. So, but then again, they could surprise us. They could go on a run and do the opposite of what they did last season. But that losing streak last season, their form was appalling. So that was the North Queensland Cowboys. Now I've got Fine. Oh God, because I forgot I stopped doing my videos for a bit. I've now got. Okay, now we get to Parramatta. Promising much, and then in the finals, they get to the second week and it just peters out. Although last season they were close to beating Penrith and getting through to the prelims. Um, I can see Paramount taking that next step. They always get out to really blisteringly hot starts, and it's about maintaining that intensity for the entire 24, 25-week season. It's now or never for them because several key players they will not be there next year. There's players coming off contract this year and next year. This is their last opportunity with the squad they have. They lose Reid Mahoney um, at the end of this season, so he's their best hooker. He's key for them, and he's had shoulder reconstruction surgery in the off season, so his fitness as well will be tested. Mitch Moses, he's had a few niggly leg injuries in the last couple of years. Um, he's got to control that emotion. Obviously, they've got a completely rebuilt left side in the outside backs. We'll see how it pans out. They're still going to be a finals team. It's just where they finish in the top eight and how far they progress in the finals once the regular season's done. Um, yeah, but it's the consistency and not blowing themselves out and burning themselves out too early in the season and peaking at the right time. But some of those matches towards the end of the season and into the finals, they had some right Titanic, some of the most gripping, best footy I've seen in a very long time. Penrith Panthers, a lot of people think 3 grand finals in a row and going back to back, it's very difficult. But it's also, I think they've learned the lessons year on year. So this is a side that's going to be the new Melbourne Storm, I think, a new Sydney Roosters, constantly in the conversation, regardless of how the season goes. I think it's possible they do a back to back, but as the Roosters prove how hard it was to try and do 3 grand finals in a row, they did 2, they won 2. Penrith have had 2 grand finals in a row. It's really hard to do that. Um, you know, regularly. It's so difficult to win back to back. It took a toll on the Roosters. So for the last 2 years, the Roosters have been bashed and banged up, and they've had players retire because of injury. Penrith, the one good thing they have, youth on their side, and if they can keep Luai and Cleary together as a halves combination for the next 5 or 10 years, they could do what Melbourne did with Cronk, Slater, and Smith for so long. I think they can get back to a grand final. It's whether it's a grand final too far too soon, but this is going to be they're going to be a side to beat for a very very long time. At the same token, Cleary he's missing the first 3 weeks of the season. If he goes down injured again, could that upset them a little bit, like upset their chances? They've lost Burton, which is a problem. They've got depth, but it's just whether they with the amount of mental fatigue that trying to get to a grand final every year, it's not plausible every year. But it's hard to look at them not making a grand final. But it's signs were there last season that teams like Parramatta had worked them out in the finals, and there were some weaknesses that were starting to seep into their play a little bit. But again, as I said last year, prediction grand final, and Nathan Cleary was the key player, and I got that right. That was terrifying. I got that right. I think all my predictions were right. I think, or nearly all of them. South Sydney, obviously coming off losing the grand final. They've lost Reynolds. They've lost Wayne Bennett as coach. I can still see them making the top 8. But it'll be a push for them to get back to the grand final. Inexperienced coach, inexperienced halfback. in Eliash. They've lost Reynolds. Latrell Mitchell has to stay, suspension free when he comes back to play. The energy he brings to that side when he's not there, they just don't look right. They've lost Gagai as well, so will Taff remain fullback and Latrell go back into left centre? It's plausible. So they've lost a bit. They still do not underestimate this side at your peril. But I think losing so many key pieces in the coaching setup and in the playing setup is going to have an impact. But they should still make the 8. It's where they finish in the top 8 for me. Whether they can have another cheeky little run for a grand final or it has that window passed for them. And yeah, can Iliash slip into Adam Reynolds' shoes and take up the mantle and become that dominant half? Because kicking game is going to be crucial in the early weeks of the season. The Dragons, St George. I predicted a wooden spoon for them last year. How wrong was I? It's a 50-50 whether they're going to make the finals or not, and whether they're going to sink or swim. Simple. Everything was going really well until barbecue gate. So their own ill discipline off the field cost them. And that's what annoys me, because they had a lot of potential in the first half of last season, and then they misbehaved off the field, and it cost them. And they couldn't get that team chemistry back, and they couldn't get the momentum back, and then their season unravelled real fast, real quick, and in the end, they missed out on what was a certain finals appearance. And they've only got themselves to blame for their off-field misbehaviour. Plain and simple. Zach Lomax, I think, is still going to be crucial for them, much like last year's prediction video. At one point, he had half their points. So, if scoring is going to be a problem, Zach Lomax, I mean, look, he creates a lot. He's a very creative player. He's back at the hand passes as well. They are just to Radradra, not Radradra. They're something to behold. They really are. But I still think that they've got some young talent coming through, and that is a strength. And they haven't been scarred, I wouldn't think, by an embarrassing finals defeat or getting a wooden spoon. The risk is either they make the finals or they fall apart. It's a 50-50 with the Dragons because of their inexperience in a lot of positions, and how they were really good for half the season and they fell apart in the second half of the season. It's a bit Jekyll and Hyde with them. They're either going to be really, really good and again be a dark horse, or they're going to not fulfill their potential. And I fear they don't fulfill their potential. And keeping Zach Lomax fit and firing is going to be crucial for them. Okay, last two teams. Sydney Roosters, injuries have caught up with them. Sam Walker was a revelation last year in adversity. When Luke Keary went down, absolute revelation, thrust into the limelight. Possibly before he was fully ready. They didn't have much choice though. At that point, at one point they didn't. They couldn't even name a full 17 at one point. Yeah, some weeks they had to just keep calling up reserve grade players and go through their under 20s at one point. I mean, half their team was probably under the age of 20 at one point. Their depth really, really, really was tested. They lost Boyd Courtner, the Morris twins, Jake Friend. Basically, their leadership core was decimated. Tedesco had to become captain. So they've lost all their leaders apart from Luke Keary and Tedesco. That's a problem. That is still I think it's still going to be a big hurdle for them this season is the loss of those players in such a short space of time. But Trent Robinson has extended. He wants to stick around for a long time and do, what Wayne Bennett's done in the game, or and Craig Bellamy has done at Melbourne, which I think is important that he's decided to stick around and extend. I think that's crucial, but I still think losing those key players, Boyd Cordner, Jake Friend, and the Morris twins, those key veteran players, and Luke Keary, if another injury for him could be, time to call it a day career-wise. I think their depth has been tested. And at one point last year, they had a full starting lineup of players out injured, if not more. I don't think they make the grand final. If they do, it would be a miracle. I still think they're a finals team. They might just implode this season and go, it's a rebuilding season. We have faith in Trent Robinson, but we need to get these young guys a bit more experience, a bit more game time. But at the moment, their best lineup is fully fit and ready for round one. If they get decimated by injury again, I think that depth is now weaker than what it was last year. I think they've got a weaker squad than they had at this time last year going into the season. Losing Boyd Cordner and losing Jake Friend, the co-captains, is definitely a setback. Is Tedesco ready to take on yet another season of responsibility with Luke Keary? And Joey Marnie, he's got to now become basically the captain on the field. It's make or break time, I think, for some of these young guys as well. But it's the Roosters, never count them out. But I could see them having a bit more of a down season, even with a fully fit squad. I think they've lost a little bit in experience and depth. So we'll see what happens there. And finally, the West Tigers, who managed to get worse every season. This has got to be Michael Maguire's last chance to get something out of this team. Signing Jackson Hastings is a good move, but naming 5 co-captains is ridiculous. Adam Dewey's obviously out to start the season with injury. I think that's a problem. Big concern that such a key player, probably their best player for the last 3 years, is sidelined. But having 5 co-captains, that's worrying. That does show a leadership vacuum. I can see them getting worse. If they do get better, I can't see them making finals again. And question marks come about Luke Brooks again. He's never made it to a finals appearance. Plus, this is the longest drought for any team not making the postseason in the NRL era. And if they fail to make it this year, it's over a decade. That is not acceptable. And with the talk of further expansion and the position of the team and their location, Penrith and Parramatta are nicking their juniors. They have mismanaged the roster for so long. That defeat to Canterbury at the end of the season, that's just shocking. Absolutely shocking. So there are a lot of question marks about this team going into this season. That Fly on the Wall, Tales of Tiger Town documentary, I wish they hadn't done that now. I mean, it was great viewing, don't get me wrong. Absolutely great to watch. But I wouldn't think it was great to watch if you are a Tigers fan, because it does show the issues that the club continues to have. And I don't think it's on Michael Maguire only. I think there's been a succession of coaching appointments and poor signings and poor roster management and off-field instability. I don't think the Tigers make fun football again. It's do they get the wooden spoon? In my opinion, I think they're wooden spooners. Them or Canterbury, wooden spooners for me. But that's my opinion, and obviously opinions are subjective. So, and everyone has, their own opinion and their own viewpoint. But as I say, yeah, opinions and viewpoints are subjective. I think the West Tigers could get the wooden spoon. How they haven't had the wooden spoon before is beyond me because they've been that lackluster and progressively getting worse. That's the frustrating thing if you're a Tigers fan is each season under Michael Maguire they've slipped further down the ladder, and there's only 16 teams in the competition. There's not that much further they can slip. So that's my little preview. I think out of the top 8 last year, I think there'll be about a 2-team turnover. 2 teams that missed out last year getting in, which in my opinion would be Cronulla and Canberra would be the teams getting in. The teams that slip out, it's a hard one. I think Newcastle may slip out. I think the Titans will progress as well. And it wouldn't surprise me if maybe Manly or Souths, because I think depth may be an issue and
losing key players may be an issue. So it's going to be a very contested battle for, I think, 5th to 9th or 10th, who makes it to the finals and who misses out. And that kind of battle over those positions will be very, very congested this season. It may go down to the wire like it did last season, down to the final day of the season. I think the top 4 or 5 are going to be pretty settled, and I think the bottom end of the table is going to be pretty settled. Brisbane might make a run for the 8, but I can't see them doing much in the final should they get there. Don't think the squad's ready yet. And a lot depends on Adam Reynolds and his fitness and how he gels with his new teammates. And I have concerns about the North Queensland Cowboys and Canterbury and the West Tigers going into this season. And if they get sort of cut off at the bottom and a bit detached, their seasons could unravel really fast, real quick. So, again, my views are subjective. Others will have different opinions on where they think, teams are going to finish. At the end of the day, looking back at my predictions from last year, I got most of them right, ironically. I got the grand final right, Melbourne Penrith, which was a replay of the previous year. I wouldn't be surprised if neither team made the grand final this year, and we have 2 new, grand finalists. That wouldn't surprise me either, with how the salary cap era levels the playing field, so to speak. But we might have Canterbury getting back-to-back wooden spoons. North Queensland could get a wooden spoon. St George are so hit and miss. The Dragons, they could be making the finals appearance or getting a wooden spoon. So ultimately, it is a very, very mixed bag. I think this year is harder to predict than last year. Absolutely. This year, I think, is actually harder to predict than last year's season. There we go. I'm open to any questions anyone might have. I know there was a couple of non-NRL based questions to start the stream, but I'm open to questions anyone might have. As I say, my thoughts on where teams go from here, I think there's going to be very little actual change from the last couple of years. I think those teams that make the finals versus those that don't, as I say, one or two different. I think which was the case with Cronulla and Canberra dropping out, and Gold Coast. I think Newcastle getting in. That was the only difference. That was the only swap of teams from the season before. I think very similar again. Very similar again with that kind of turnover of teams that make finals. But yeah, I'll happily take some more questions. As I say, my viewpoint is not a lot of positional change. I think the bottom three will be Canterbury, the Cowboys, and dare I say it, Tigers. I think of my bottom three. In what order is up to you. And if the start of the season goes bad for the Canterbury Bulldogs, Trent Barrett doesn't survive the season. If, however, they're competitive and they're close in games and they win a couple of games, he might hold on to his job. But massive improvement is expected with the roster they've got. Who they've signed and the positions they've signed them in. With Duffy and Burton and Adokar, massive improvement is expected. They cannot go up, they can't be as poor as they were last year. That just cannot happen. And they were, tailed off very early on. And it was very clear with weeks remaining that they were going to get the wooden spoon. And then suddenly, the last game of the season, they absolutely obliterated the West Tigers. Absolutely obliterated them. So it makes you wonder where that performance was the entire year. And they had moments in last season where you were hoping they would get a win. You were hoping they would get some form together. And it just didn't happen. And I think a lot of the problems with Canterbury are, they're coming out of a salary cap disaster and, a restructuring of the board. But I don't think Trent Barrett is the right guy to get that team to where the team needs to be. I think get Dean Payback. I think they made a mistake letting him go and getting Barrett in. I think that's just Dean Pay kept them away from getting the wooden spoon 3 consecutive years. I think the players played for Dean Pay; they weren't playing for Trent Barrett. And their trials performances, yeah. But then Brisbane weren't overly convincing either, so. And without Adam Reynolds having a run out on that side, we just don't know what he's going to bring to the table. With new teammates, new structures, new coach, a less experienced team around him, how good Adam Reynolds could be for that side. He's come from a very settled Sydney side to an unsettled Brisbane side, so that's another question mark. Did Brisbane take that next step under Kevin Walters, or do they step back? Have the mistakes of the Seabold and Bennett era been corrected? Yeah, it's a difficult one. There's still, anything can happen. Obviously, they've got enlarged, extended squads for this year because of the COVID situation. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in that regard. I think with some of the injuries some of the teams already picked up, that's actually going to put them in good stead for the if COVID hits. Panthers without Cleary, they've now got experience of having players play state of origin. They would have learned to be consistent rather than, go for a record-breaking minor premiership season. Same with Melbourne. Melbourne burnt themselves out in the regular season. So we'll just have to see what happens. Yes, I'm now very interested to see what questions you guys now have. It's going to be interesting how the season plays out. COVID will have an impact, in a different impact than the last 2 years. The NRL's goal is to get every game played, hence the extended squads. So we may see a lot of debutants this year at first grade level, which could ultimately have an impact on results and performances. But there are some sides that I have big concerns about them being competitive. 3 or 4 sides I think are in serious trouble before a competitive match has been played. Um, so we'll see what happens. And I think there's some dark horses in there to upset the apple cart. Cronulla could be very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Canberra as well. Don't poke the wounded tiger. They've got some good young players. Xavier Savage looks really dangerous from fullback. Nico Hyde looks like he's going to be playing in the centres this season. So Xavier Savage may play on the wing, but he looks dangerous ball in hand in attack coming in into the line. Nico Hyde, very consistent fullback. Not the best fullback in the league, but he's on the top 5. And he runs all day. And he had obviously a career-ending injury last season, neck surgery. Xavier Savage comes into replace, gets injured. If they're both fit and firing, play one in the centres or on the wing and one at fullback, and they could just really tear defences apart. But the half situation for Fogarty now injured is a blow, and I'm a Raiders fan. And of course, Hodgson Starling with his off-field dramas, that's a bit of a concern, but it's all about getting Jack White firing this season, running the ball. They could be a dark horse. But we'll see what happens. Ricky Stewart performed miracles down there in Canberra. So. And only a couple of years ago, they were in the grand final and a semi-final, so they're not a bad team overnight. Much like the Roosters, injuries caught up with them, and player turnover caught up with them a little bit, and they took a step back. But I can see them bouncing back. So yes, any further questions? I'm open to questions now. Yeah, also really, really enjoyed the NRLW as well. 6 teams now. Obviously, the Warriors female team withdrew, which is a shame. But we've got two new teams, Parramatta and Newcastle, and they've been very entertaining so far. And I'm really looking forward to this weekend's games. The women's Roosters side has been disappointing this season so far. The 2 games they've played, they've lost both. They need to bounce back this weekend at home. But yeah, so open to questions. Any questions? Still waiting for some questions. Because I've said all I need to say really about where I think teams are at. Obviously, Dally M and positions like the hooker of the year, the centre of the year, lock of the year, prop of the year, all that kind of thing. Too early to really tell. There is going to be a chance there's going to be a lot of players making debuts because of COVID. I think this year, I think there's a lot of young players waiting to step up. We're going to see squad depth tested this year. There is no doubt on that. I think squad depths will be tested. There are some players like Jerry Croker being put down into reserve grade, for example. New combinations, players changing clubs. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And already there are players going into the season on suspensions as well. So the trials took their toll. Players did get themselves suspended. And going into this NRL season, it will be interesting to see how the judiciary and deals with foul play. There's already been a debate about some incidents that happened in the trials that should have been suspendable offences, and then there were some suspensions that came out of that, and some injuries that came out of that. So what we're looking for is consistency when it comes to disciplinary issues. It's all let's see what happens really in that regard. Okay, I'm going to call that a little stream. I just thought I'd do my preview on a live stream. Should have done it a bit earlier in the day, really, when the Aussie crowd was still awake. But there we go. Hey, it is what it is. Thank you very much for the few questions we've had. And I appreciate, obviously, the time talking about all the teams, all 16 teams. And hopefully, yeah, we have a really fun, open season. But I can see the top 4 or 5, like last season, that little gap appearing. And I can see some teams improving, and I can see some teams taking a step back. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Please place your thoughts, obviously, in the comment section below after this video, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.